My husband was always quite the genius, an expert at hiding, borrowing, and spending until everything was stretched to the breaking point. I had no idea that every one of our family successes was built on lies and debts, like a house of cards. And then one day, it all came crashing down, and I was left standing in the wreckage. But if he thought he'd get away unscathed, he was dead wrong. Let's start with the craziest part. My name is Sarah. Here's the situation. I'm 32, and my husband John is 37. We've been together for 5 years, and I always saw him as the picture of stability. Imagine it. He owns a business, we have a lakeside house where everything is perfect, down to the last fork on the dining table. Our whole life is like an ad for happiness, the embodiment of the American dream. I naively thought that with a man like him by my side, nothing could go wrong. Spoiler alert, I was so wrong. One day, as usual, I was sorting through the mail. You know, those stacks of ads, delivery notices, and other papers that usually go straight out into the trash. But this time, there was one envelope that stood out. It was thick, had a bank logo on it, and John's name printed across the front. My inner detective couldn't resist, so I opened it. And bam, a statement with an enormous debt balance. My mind instantly went, what the hell? Honestly, my first thought was that it must be a banking mistake. I mean, there's no way that John, my John, could be drowning in debt. But as I kept reading, I saw his signature. And those numbers, they were serious figures. The dates on the documents, they lined up with the first years of our marriage. So he'd been dragging us into a financial hole practically from the beginning. At that moment, I felt a block of ice growing in my chest. All right, I thought, this is just some kind of clerical error, right? But the more I looked at it, the worse it got. I decided I had to confront John directly. So that evening, he comes home, and I, trying to stay calm, ask, hey, a strange letter came from the bank. Care to explain? His reaction? He gives me this casual look and says something like, oh, it's nothing serious, just a few minor issues. Minor issues? Really? The amount in question was enough to cover a year's tuition at Harvard. With every word he said, my suspicions grew. I just couldn't believe that the person I'd shared everything with for the past 5 years could be keeping me so completely in the dark. After John brushed it off with his nothing serious remark, I was in total shock. I couldn't sleep, of course. I lay there, tossing and turning, with so many questions running through my mind, but one kept coming back. What else is he hiding? First thing in the morning, before John could even leave, I started going through his papers. At first, I felt a bit guilty, but within a minute, I was as focused as a real detective. My first hint that something was wrong was almost immediate. A bunch of old bills, but not just any bills, the strange kind. Bills for large amounts, sums that didn't fit with our supposedly perfect lifestyle John was always so proud of. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 weird documents. Oh no, the deeper I dug, the more little surprises I uncovered. I nearly dropped my jaw when I stumbled upon one of his investments, supposedly put into a project with huge potential. Of course, that huge potential turned out to be a colossal failure. Can you imagine? John, who was supposed to be the king of business savvy, throwing money around like he was at an auction to see who could go broke fastest. That's when it hit me. His business wasn't nearly as successful as he made it out to be. And our beautiful lakefront house? It turned out it was built on a foundation of debt and lies. It all started to feel like a horrible movie, and I was the actress who hadn't signed up for this role. I wanted to keep digging, but my hands were shaking so much I had to stop before I broke something out of sheer frustration. This time I decided to go straight to the point. Enough with the politeness and half measures. I waited for John to get home from work and asked him directly, listen, what's going on with these debts? Why didn't you tell me? At first he gave me the typical, oh, it's nothing, I've got it under control. But I wasn't buying it. I stood there, staring him down, and he started to get nervous. And then, bam. He threw his hands up and, looking at me like I was the enemy, snapped, why are you digging into my business? Don't you trust me? Oh, sure, buddy. Let's play the trust card. Accuse me of mistrust when you're the one hiding debt like some kind of secret agent. Seriously, John? I said, keeping eye contact. You call this trust? He was clearly annoyed that I wasn't backing down, but the thing was, my patience was long gone. I pressed him to explain what was going on. Finally, after a lot of hesitation and more staring at the floor, he admitted it. His business had been going downhill for months, if not years, and he had been trying to fix things on his own so he wouldn't worry me. Oh, that's a good one. All right, let's break this down. Not worry me? If it was under control, then why was he hiding all those bills and investments in failing projects? I started to feel genuinely scared. This man, the person I'd known for 5 years, seemed like a complete stranger. Now that my doubts were only growing stronger, I decided to take a cue from spy movies. Yes, I knew his phone password, don't ask how. So when John left his phone unattended, I quickly checked what was going on there. I saw a conversation with someone named Mike from Investments. It sounded like a character from a cheap novel. And then things got interesting. They were talking about some long-term investment. Like it was a gold mine that was about to make us rich. But when I saw the numbers, I almost choked on my coffee. The guy was talking about tens of thousands of dollars, as if it was just sitting in a drawer, and all he had to do was grab it and invest it in some super successful project. And here was the kicker. There were no guarantees of success. John was gambling with our savings like he was at a roulette table. And here I was, processing all this. I started to remember all those family trips to the lake, the gifts he'd given me for the holidays. It seemed like every single one of them had been paid for with either a credit card or money we essentially didn't have. I felt like I was the star of some absurd reality show where everyone was lying to each other, and I was the only one who didn't get the script. Panic set in. John was like a gambler, betting everything we had on some mythical combination. When the situation became completely unbearable, I decided to go to the extreme. I arranged to meet with his close friend, Mike. Yes, that same Mike who supposedly knows everything about John, practically like a brother. We met at a cafe and I didn't waste any time. I spilled everything I'd found out. At first, he put on a look of shock, but I could tell right away something was off. When I stared him down and asked if he knew anything about it, he sighed, pursed his lips and said, "You know, everyone goes through tough times. John's just having a rough patch." I just squinted at him. Oh, of course, tough times. Apparently, these tough times include hiding massive debts from his wife, investing in crazy schemes, and doing shady deals behind my back. Mike sat there, essentially just shrugging it all off. What kind of support is that? It seemed like he and John had their own little club of secrets, and I, of course, wasn't part of it. You get it, right? His best friend wasn't on my side. Instead, he chose to keep my husband's secret rather than come clean with me. Some friendship, that is, if you mean a strong bro code, in covering up lies. What else were they hiding? Did they have some secret society with weekly meetings? So there I sat, realizing I was surrounded by traitors. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, to put it mildly. Inside, I was screaming from loneliness and helplessness. When I realized that none of John's close friends would help me, I decided it was time to bring in a professional. I met with a financial advisor, hoping he'd tell me how to untangle all this, or at least give me an idea of just how bad it was. And you know what? That was the worst consultation of my life. The advisor started with phrases like, well, the situation is, to put it mildly, unstable. Unstable? It was a full-blown financial apocalypse. Our assets, almost zero. The house, mortgaged to the hilt, nearly, as he put it, on the brink of insolvency. And our accounts, they looked about as full as an empty fridge at the end of the month. And here's the cherry on this cake. He added that our debts were still growing. I sat there listening, feeling like I'd been sucked into some alternate reality where I was just an extra in a financial tragedy. My anger was boiling inside me. How could John get us into this situation and stay silent, as if nothing was wrong? The advisor wrapped up his encouraging speech by telling me to act quickly, or everything we have will go toward repaying these debts. That was it. My fear fully morphed into fury. I needed to protect not just myself, but whatever we still had left, even if it was only a couple of plates and an old sofa. That evening, I could no longer play the patient wife. Enough was enough. I told him point blank, Listen, John, either you tell me the full truth right now, or tomorrow I'm filing for divorce and we'll start dividing up our wealth. So make your choice." John froze, and then something dark flashed in his eyes. He grabbed my arm hard and started mumbling something like, "Sarah, please don't. I'll fix everything." His face turned into a mask of sheer desperation, but it was way too late for that. Promises and pleas, they all sounded hollow to me now. I couldn't care less. Forget all his "I'll fix it" and "you mean everything to me." And then I let him have it. I unloaded everything I'd been holding back, every sarcastic thought that had run through my mind these past few weeks. I said that I couldn't even comprehend what kind of person would keep someone in the dark for so long. I told him that in our family, apparently, one of the foundations of trust was total secrecy, not boring old honesty. John started defending himself, yelling that he did it for us, that he didn't want to worry me. Seriously? For us? Investing in failed projects that even his bro Mike hadn't bothered to tell me about? It was so pathetic that I couldn't hold back anymore and laughed. Not out of joy, but from the absurdity of his reasoning. By the end, I realized that there was nothing left between us. After this whole fiasco with debts and revelations, I pulled myself together and filed for divorce. John, of course, tried pleading with me, saying things like, "Just give me one more chance, I'll fix everything." But let's be honest, the train had left the station and he was still standing on the platform. How can you trust someone who's built a fortress of lies around you? The divorce process was, to put it mildly, hellish. Peace. The house, which was supposed to be our nest, was put on the line to help cover his endless debts. And what was left? Nothing. Even his prized possessions, the car, the watch, and other symbols of his success, were all auctioned off. I could have taken pleasure in that, but the truth is, I was just exhausted. I watched his whole career crumble and thought it was some dark farce where everyone got what they deserved. When I was finally alone, I felt, how to say this? Free. It was tough, yes, but I realized that it's better to start with a clean slate than stay in a cage with someone who betrayed you. And you know what? There's a strange truth in it. All those red flags I stubbornly ignored have now become a kind of life lesson for me. No more, maybe things will change. As for John, left without a home, family, and money, he spiraled into a deep crisis. His business closed down, his friends disappeared, and he was left alone, surrounded only by his promises and debts. And if this experience taught me anything, it's that trust isn't just a pretty word. Break it once,
I always thought I knew
and that's
everything
it.
about my husband.
You can never
until
get
I
it
found
back.
an
Envelope with debts the size of our house. It turned out his success was a carefully hidden deception, and everything we had was hanging by a thread. But he had no idea that he would pay a high price for this lie. So are you ready to see how a perfect life falls apart? My name is Lisa, and I'm 29. Jack and I have been together for 3 years now, and he has always seemed like the perfect example of a successful, caring husband. He has his own business, he's older, smarter, or so I thought, and everything in our life always went according to plan. Luxury trips, a beautiful home, envious looks from our friends. But you know that saying about things being too good to be true? Well, that pretty much sums up our situation. One ordinary day, I was cleaning up the kitchen as usual. Not the most exciting task, but then my eyes landed on an envelope just lying there on the table, looking completely innocent. It had the logo of a financial company I'd seen somewhere before, though Jack had never mentioned any loans or mortgages. Well, curiosity killed the cat, as they say. I couldn't resist opening the envelope. So I opened this envelope, and that's where the nightmare begins. Inside was a notice about a debt, with a sum so large that my eyes practically popped out of my head. Was this the price of our house? I kept reading and realized it was a debt. And not just any debt. It was a gigantic one that we were expected to pay off, and there was no way it could be handled in just a few months. Seriously? I'm standing in the middle of the kitchen, holding this wretched envelope, realizing that Jack, the same Jack who swore all the bills were paid, who always said business is booming, had hidden this from me. My mind went into overdrive, a whirl of thoughts that, if they were physical objects, would have filled every inch of the room. Why hadn't Jack told me anything? Since when did he start hiding things? And how many more of these lovely surprises were waiting for me? This wasn't the kind of thing you could just ignore and pretend nothing happened. So, evening comes. Jack is sitting casually on the couch, flipping through some papers, as if we don't have a debt the size of a mortgage. I decide to keep my cool and approach him carefully, to avoid blowing up right away. I sit down beside him and, trying to sound casual, ask, "Hey Jack, I found this strange envelope from a financial company. What's it about?" His reaction? He didn't even flinch. Instantly changed the subject, as if I'd just asked him about the weather. He literally ignored me, like I was muttering something under my breath. My brain practically exploded. What was that? He even smirked a little, saying, "Oh, Lisa, it's just a temporary setback. Everything's under control." A temporary setback? I had to remind myself that I'm a grown, reasonable adult, and that snatching those papers out of his hands right now wouldn't be the best move. But his "everything's under control" sounded like a line from a script, as if he'd already used it 100 times on someone. With every word he said, I swear, my anxiety only got worse. I looked at him, and he smiled back, confident, as if he had all the cards, and I was supposed to believe him. But something told me that if I kept being polite and cautious, I'd never get the truth. All right then, if Jack wanted to play Let's Hide Financial Secrets, it looked like I'd have to play detective. I was sure he had no clue I knew his password. Sure, spying isn't really my thing, but desperate times call for desperate measures. When he finally left his phone unattended, I quickly grabbed it and started going through his messages. And there it was, a chat with some guy named Rick. Classic opener. "Hey man, what's going on with Project Overflow?" All right, I thought, maybe it's just business stuff, or so I wanted to believe. But the more I read, the darker it got. Turns out my dear husband was knee-deep in some shady investments that were clearly not going as planned. Rick was obviously losing patience because he was saying things like, "Look, Jack, this is getting out of hand. If we keep going, it could all go, well, you know." So there I was, holding the phone, slowly processing the information. Out of hand? How about giving me a heads up as the legally bound victim of these brilliant investments? With each message, I felt worse. The sums they were talking about weren't for a new couch. These were the kind of numbers that could sink us faster than I could say divorce. It turned out Jack was practically gambling with our savings, and I, apparently, was the forgotten bystander. All this time, he had acted like the perfect husband, but behind my back, he was turning our money into some kind of hellish investment trap. Realizing that the situation was beyond my wifely competence, I decided I needed advice from someone who knew Jack better and might be able to explain what was going on. And of course, that brought me to Tom. Tom was his best friend, someone who'd been by Jack's side since college. He'd always seemed reliable to me, an honest guy who wouldn't dodge the truth. We met up at a cafe and I didn't waste any time. I laid out everything I'd discovered. No sugarcoating, the envelope with the debt, the sketchy messages with Rick. Tom looked at me without blinking, then shrugged, like I'd just asked him about the weather. And then he says, "Well, Lisa, Jack's just doing his best for the family." Honestly, I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's all you've got, Tom? Jack's just doing his best?" I repeated the question, hoping he'd add something, maybe a "but I'm worried too," or at least an "I'll talk to him." But nope, he didn't seem to care at all. He sat there, arms crossed, calmly explaining how Jack was trying, almost making me feel guilty. Guilty for even trying to find the truth. I stood there, feeling a mix of anger, disappointment, and complete loneliness. That was the moment I realized. Yeah, they had really backed me into a corner. The person I'd thought was reliable had effortlessly chosen Jack's side over mine. After my honest conversation with Tom, it was clear to me. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to go straight to the source. The most mysterious character in this financial drama, Rick. A bit of searching, and I managed to get his contact. Yes, meeting up with this random guy was a bit risky, but when you've been dragged into a mess of debt and secrets, what's left to lose? We met at a rundown cafe, the kind of place that practically screamed spot for secret meetings. I expected to see some confident investor, but in front of me was a man completely beaten down by life. Rick looked like he'd just stepped out of a movie about shattered dreams. Messy hair, wrinkled shirt, a nervous tic, and such a haunted look that I had to resist the urge to sit a little farther away. Rick started talking the moment I introduced myself. He was nervously tapping the menu with his fingers and spilling the beans on the schemes he and Jack had been running. It quickly became clear that these schemes were just different episodes in one giant failure. I sat there, trying to keep a neutral expression, even though every new fact felt like a punch to the gut. Rick told me how Jack was betting on completely unstable companies, throwing around our savings without a second thought, as if money would magically appear out of nowhere. Rick spoke of hundreds of thousands of dollars vanishing into thin air, and I tried not to let on that I was breaking apart inside. It hit me then that this wasn't just another financial idea. This was a reckless game of survival, and Jack had gambled everything we had. With everyone around, including Jack's so-called friends and the hapless Rick, turning out to be little more than clowns in this circus, I decided it was time to uncover the truth in a professional way. No more games. I found a financial advisor, someone who could really see this mess for what it was and give it to me straight. So there I was, sitting in his office, trying to look like I had it all together. Though, honestly, I was boiling inside. The advisor, an older man with a cold, calculating gaze, examined our portfolio. At first he mumbled something to himself, but then he suddenly looked up and said, "What we're dealing with here is almost total bankruptcy." I felt a wave of coldness rise inside me. "What do you mean by almost total?" I asked, though the answer was already hanging ominously in the air. "Your house is mortgaged," he continued coolly. "Your assets are just zeros on paper. Everything that may have seemed stable to you is just a pretty illusion. And frankly, there's enough debt to last several lifetimes." Well, a pretty illusion sounded like he was describing some cheap thriller rather than my life. I sat there gripping the armrests while my mind desperately tried to process how Jack could do this. I wasn't angry. I was in a state of pure, unfiltered indignation. He had burned through everything we had, every stone, every brick, every dollar. And of course, he kept me in the dark, as if I were just part of the scenery in his disastrous play. I wanted to scream to break everything in that office, but instead, I just exhaled quietly, listening to the death sentence of our happiness. If before, I was just trying to figure things out, now I had one goal, to end the situation and reclaim everything Jack had turned to smoke and ashes. That evening, I walked into the house with icy determination. Jack was sitting on the couch, watching TV as if everything in our life was perfect. Well, I didn't care anymore. I walked up, stood in front of him, and, without looking away, said, "Either you tell me everything right now, or tomorrow I'm filing for divorce. And believe me, I'll make sure you don't even have this couch to sit on." For the first time in all this, he actually looked scared. This wasn't his usual smug grin, the one he used whenever we talked. No, this time he turned white as a sheet. "Lisa, please, it was a mistake. I was only trying to do what was best," he stammered, looking pathetic, almost pleading. I looked at him, and instead of anger, I felt a crushing disappointment. I listened to his apologies, his excuses about random mistakes, but it all sounded hollow. These mistakes weren't random. They were a disaster he'd created with his own hands. He reached out to touch me, but I recoiled as if from fire. "Random mistakes, Jack?" I scoffed. "Mistakes don't lead to bankruptcy. They don't leave your wife in the dark while you drain everything we had. So tell me, was it random when you put us at risk?" His pleas, his promises to make it right, that remorseful face, none of it worked anymore. I looked at the man who used to be close to me, but now he seemed like a stranger, even laughable in his pathetic attempt to save what he'd destroyed. Filing for divorce was easier than I thought. No tears, no breakdowns, just a cold feeling that it was over. All those years with Jack, this supposedly stable life he'd built for us, turned out to be nothing but an illusion. The home I thought was our nest was now being sold to cover part of the debts. Everything else we had vanished just as quickly as ice in the sun, leaving me with the bitter realization that all this time I'd been living in the dark. Jack tried talking to me, tried reminding me of how we once loved each other, but to me, he was no longer a person, just a walking symbol of betrayal and a shattered life. He'd lost everything, and that was the price he paid for hiding the truth. I didn't feel an ounce of regret, only a cold resolve never to let anyone manipulate my life like this again. Now, I have a new set of rules. I knew that I would no longer be naive, wouldn't let myself believe in pretty fairy tales or trust blindly. The lesson I'd learned was harsh, but I knew that from this point on, lies wouldn't stand a chance in my life.